that was the first time that I remember our TV was allowed to be kept on during dinner. Always before, the rule was that the TV went off at supper time. But because, I mean, it was, you'd see Wilmington 10, you'd see Vietnam, there was so much turmoil. I mean, obviously, that's the understatement of the century to say that there was so much turmoil in the country at the time of the civil rights movement and Vietnam War protests.
Well, I think most of the black radicals at that time, earlier, were Korean vets. Robert F. Williams was a Korean vet, and then Vietnam, certainly Vietnam vets in Oxford, and I don't know. Do you remember them coming into Wilmington?
What
Black Power.
Yeah.
Panthers.
The Black Panthers.
Yeah.
I remember that.
Well, I think, shifting into the 60s, I think your question is really important because I started to write sort of a personal autobiography recently, and I tried to reconstruct my experience in the 1960s, some of which I had a hard time remembering. But I went and looked at some newspapers and things like that, and looking at the Chicago newspapers in the 1960s, one of the great things they did in the Tribune, which is not my favorite newspaper, published pictures every day of the servicemen who were killed in Vietnam. And some days they had 20 pictures. And the level of violence that was going on in the Chicago area and in the country as a whole was phenomenal in the 1960s. And in general, in countries, when the level of social turmoil, just call it that, right, gets to a certain peak, people are ready to take very radical measures. And they don't care too much about who gets hurt in the process. I had a good friend who's from Santiago, Chile, and in the 1960s, I'm sorry, the 73, I guess, was the revolution. There was a lot of social unrest in Chile. Of course, a very different country, but there was tremendous support for the military coup. Not killing 10,000 people, which they did, but there was tremendous support on the sort of European-based middle class for that coup. So I think one of the things that we notice when we study history is that when the level of discontent gets too high, there is going to be a reaction of violence, and it's usually going to be a violent reaction by those who have been in power, and it will involve violence, and it will crush out whatever kind of social movement that we may think of as, generally speaking, progressive.
Well, we saw it in 1968 and again in 1989. The world changed in those 2 decades. It's a great book by Mark Kalansky called 1968. It's kind of a popular book, but it's really about protest against dictators and oligarchies and oppression and communists all over the world. Wasn't just in the United States. It was in Europe and many other parts of the world at that time. And then, 1989, the Berlin Wall comes down and the world changes again.
I have a question about the school system. The 1968, I guess, or whenever they closed Wilson, I've heard several stories in Wilmington that says the students showed up for school and they were told they were going to other places. Like they had no clue they were going. It was just closed overnight, and when they showed up, oh no, you're going to Hanover, you're going to Harvard.
That's not true.
Okay. So, but
because I was one who was in junior high. It happened over the summertime. We were supposed to go to Wilson the next year.
You were in ninth grade?
I was in ninth grade, and we were supposed to go to Wilson the next year, and the decision was made during the summer. And instead of going to Wilson, then we found we were going to go to different places. Some of us went to New Hanover, Harvard really wasn't big enough to take the whole load, and so some went to Roland Grice, which was made into a ninth grade center, and then some went to Harvard. But no, it didn't happen overnight. It happened over the summer.
But after was it subsequently after that that the Wilmington 10 and all that happened, right? And so they bombed like the school.
Well, there were two events when there were arsons in Wilmington after Dr. King's death
right.
for several days, and then again in 1971 when after the desegregation in 1969. So it was like a year and a half where, am I right? Black students were in Hoggard and New Hanover, and the conditions were so awful, and there were so many fights, and they were so unhappy with the way their education was going that the boycott began.
Okay, so that began before King's death.
No,
right?
the boycott is after King's death. King's death is 1968.
Okay, I guess
April.
This is my question. So when you showed up or when you went to these other schools when it was integrated, was it peaceful then? Was it peaceful for a few years and then it was like you just went on over there and just did whatever?
No, it was always tense.
Okay.
I mean, it was always tense, and as Liz was saying, it was people who had been in Williston were upset because they were no longer in their school. They may have been involved in clubs and extracurricular organizations. They found themselves now not in those particular situations.
Not welcome.
But we have a white school board, right?
Why?
All white school board.
I think Ellen Newsom, who was an African American, was on the school board at that particular time. Is my recollection.
Okay. Okay. I was just wondering what was the rush and what was the rationale? If you're going to integrate the schools and everything is prospering at Williston, which if you talk to anyone who went to Williston, it's like there is no school that parallels Williston. It's like they were just so well educated. Everything was going on. To go to other schools and you can't get in sports, you're not in the same programs, you're not, cheerleaders to me, I'm like, okay, well. But anyway, none of those things are happening, it's just that you're there. What's the rationale of tearing up a black institution? Are we still on the 1898 mentality?
Well, Earl talked about Dr. Eaton. When Dr. Eaton, was very prominent, and he, we had Brown in 1954, and here we get to 1960s, 1965, 1966, 67. King is assassinated in 1968, and so there is a push. That's enough. We're going to integrate the school system. We're going to integrate our society, and am I right?
Yeah, there had been an effort. Brown was back in 1954. There had been an effort on the part of Hubert Eaton to integrate the schools for many years, and so it wasn't like this is something that all of a sudden people just decided to do this. This suit had been out there. He didn't choose the way that they were going to do it or whatever it is. But that had been out there, and they made the decision that summer. They had lost the case. They were going to integrate the school system, so they said, "Well, since we're going to do it, we'll close Williston and we'll integrate it that way." Now, in Eaton's book, he also says, and I don't remember this or whatever, that the school board, a report had been issued that said that Williston actually needed something like $200,000 worth of refitting and that kind of thing. Again, separate but equal was seldom equal, and so and rather than spend that money to upfit Williston, they decided, well, we're gonna close it. And we're gonna send the black students to the other school.
Weren't there some
Federal.
Yeah, because I was growing up in Virginia at this time, right outside of Richmond, and our big turmoil wasn't closing the schools; it was busing. busing children, African American children out of Richmond into Henrico County. And I can remember hearing court order. It was.
Well, the court order was
To get
because a suit had been
Right, but what I'm
had been
saying
brought.
is, weren't there some?
And the court order didn't say close Willis.
No,
but
but weren't there some deadlines? Because I know when I went to Brunswick County, they ended up, there was some discussion, they were gonna lose some money. They were dragging their feet, integrating, saying we have to build 3 new high schools. And they didn't integrate till 72 when the north, south, and west were built. But it was my understanding was in Brunswick County that there were some like time deadlines that came up. And between Eaton's lawsuit and those timelines, it was a good excuse to say, like you said, repairs, to shut the doors and make it go.
Yeah, there were 2 questions. One was really the question, why the rush, and that's answered by the court order, I think. And the other question is why the way?
Right.
And I mean, I think part of the answer there was I was going to say.
Nobody wanted their white children to have to go to the black school. I mean, that's what it was.
And also, it seems like we use integration and desegregation as if they mean the same thing. And I think there's a distinction. Williston students were not integrated into New Hanover and Concord. It was desegregated, yeah. But I think it disempowered the black community, which may have been what you were saying, that 1898 mindset. It's disempowered them to take away their pride of school.
Right.
Because when I taught in Rocky Mount, and they got an award in 68 or 70 for how they integrated. And the black high school was closed, but they all came into the white high school, but they had a group of black leaders, school leaders, and they met, and the grip-on that they had there is a combination of the lion from the black school and the blackbird from the white school created the grip-on. They did a wonderful job. They've gotten some awards for how they brought the trade. And that's integration to me. I mean, they accepted it and moved on. I didn't see that in the reading about Williston. It was like almost like a punishment in a sense of the word that we got to do this.
It was in a sense.
Shut it down.
You all wanted to integrate? Okay, we'll do it. We're
Yeah.
going to close this school that you like.
That was really the pattern pretty much throughout the South, of closing black schools. And one of the justifications was always that, oh yeah, by the way, they weren't equal. The facilities were almost always less desirable, and
It was just another step of a
but the other side of it was so worse.
You know, it's interesting. My brother was at Hoggard in '71, and I got his yearbook. And there's a black attorney in Wilmington. I can't remember his name, but he was a student government.
Terry.
Is that He had an office.
I'm in there too. I was my 71 was my year.
Yeah. So that with all this stuff going on, but you were able to get into student government. Did you have a president for grade level at Hoggard?
Yeah. There was a senior class officers and junior class officers and that kind of thing.
Correct me if I'm mistaken, but Hoggard was a little more successful in terms of dealing with. No.
No,
Well, Bertha said they were.
Well, I don't think it was any more successful than Hanover. I mean, it was bad at both schools. I was there in 1971. It was like Tim Tyson described. There were fights and things going on every day. We had bomb scares. You didn't know how you were going to get through the day. A bomb scare, you had to go outside and wait for them to search the building to see if there was a bomb was going to blow up. A friend of mine and I had started a chess game. So we could play chess out there on the cars while we were waiting for them to do the bomb scare kinds of things. It was hell.
There were a couple of days my parents wouldn't let my older brother go to school because they were something was going to happen.
Yeah.
In New Bern, schools closed. I remember schools just being closed for about a week, and that corresponded to the time of when the trial was all going on with the Wilmington 10, and the Black Panthers were in Wilmington, and there was a curfew. They did that in New Bern too, and I remember just totally being out of school for, I think it might have been a whole week.
there were rumors that they were going to close school, and some of us who were seniors were concerned. Well, what is that going to do with us as far as going to college and that kind of thing?
And all,
No, go ahead.
well, always leave scars too. You know, I mean, both white and black scars. A lot of students that graduated from schools in the early 1970s walked away with that feeling very bitter toward the other race. And so it takes another generation of process to heal some of that, change minds, and all of those kinds of things.
On what you're talking about, last year, 2011, was the 40th anniversary of our 40th school reunion. The whites and blacks didn't have the same reunion. They were separate.
One of the things that we've talked about a lot in the Blackboard discussions with the Scopes trial was the very negative impact that churches had. You know, the religious people had negative impact on progress in that regard. I wonder if any of you would speak to Tim Tyson's father, Vernon, was a huge factor in the progress that was made. I remember as a child him coming to speak, and it caused such an uproar, and everybody was mad at everybody else. But I think that he, along with some other leaders of churches here in Wilmington and across eastern North Carolina, really were one positive vehicle. At least that was the perception that I had as a an older, like preteen, I guess. But and didn't Reverend Chavis go to Duke Divinity? Is that true? That Reverend Chavis went to Duke Divinity School?
I don't think that
I don't think so either.
Seems like I remember pictures of him.
It's easy enough to find out, but I haven't Googled it.
I think he did, and I remember Reverend Chavis and Reverend Vernon Tyson speaking together, you know, and that was sort of at least an effort for some unity.
I remember Ben Chavis at the Gregory Church 35th anniversary of the Wilmington 10 events speaking, and you know, I'll never forget it. You know, this is what he said. He said, "Where was the black church when all these kids were, you know, wandering around? They were not there. They didn't step up." He was very angry about that, and you know that the one church that did step up had a white, you know, Yankee minister, northeastern liberal minister, and you know he's the one that ultimately brought Chavis in. But you know, 35 years later, Chavis brings that up. That the black churches, I don't know, Earl, do you remember black churches out there?
No, you're right. No, you're right.
I mean, wasn't it mostly most of the church leaders in the black churches just don't want trouble?
Well, they wanted kids to go back to
They
school,
wanted their
and you know,
kids to be able to go to
make
school
it, you're making it worse.
Or there's this continual thing as far as religion is concerned. Is your religion an inward religion when you're worrying about saving souls, or are you a social consciousness? And perhaps not all of them had the same sense of. Let's say the king always fought to try to make get churches to be
Right, exactly.
a social conscious, and not all churches have had that, and many of them, their focus is more on saving souls than being involved in social consciousness.
But Vernon Tyson and others of his contemporaries really did take a very, very strong social stand, and it was through the churches.
This young lady, but she hadn't had a lot of
Yeah, and
time.
mine's different from what y'all been talking about. So I had a question about, I guess, fusion politics and the death of the populist movement or party. Often the text, when I teach it, says that populism died because of their inflationary economic policies and, I guess, their platform being absorbed by Democrats and Republicans. But the more you read into it, you start to see on a localized level that it was actually race that played a part in the death of that movement. I guess my question to you is, which one is it on a national level?
Well, populism is a very broad term, and I'm not a historian of this period, but I'll offer my opinion. So there's an agrarian populism, and then there's a kind of industrial, right? The agrarian populism, I think, is the one that's most relevant to the South. The fusion movement is clearly trumped, crushed out by race. Now, part of this is these parallel things happening at the same time. I mean, it's really, quite remarkable in American politics where you have absolutely antithetical movements that are both kind of going on at the same time. You've got the Tea Party and you've got Occupy Wall Street, and sometimes you say, well, this same person, this one ought to be they have some of the same interests and some of the same. But so I think on the national level that happens, and the Democrat Party on the national level is in some ways allied with something like populism in terms of industrial society. Wilson is kind of a super conservative populist on that point. Though I don't really believe that that industrial populism really takes hold in the Democratic Party, except beginning in the New York Democratic Party, Al Smith's party. And there you get this transformation of the Democratic Party to becoming a vehicle that really takes hold of the issues of capitalism and industrialism and the labor movement, and bringing together of various kinds of minority groups, Eastern Europeans, all of this in one really significant party. And that then becomes the model nationally for the Democratic Party in 1932 and afterwards for a while. But to a large extent, both of the political parties and the Bull-Moose Party as well really simply represent a kind of, I would say, a kind of oligarchic structure for America as a whole. So I've tried to answer the question. I hope it did.
But I think also, in addition, one of the things that you mentioned is the idea that a lot of populist ideas were co-opted by the other parties. The graduated income tax, the direct election of senators, a lot of these things started with the populists, and they were co-opted, and people felt more comfortable voting for one of the quote unquote mainstream parties than the so-called radical party, particularly when those parties adopted some of their ideas, and I think that helped to kill the populist party as well.
Yeah. Teddy Roosevelt did some of the more remarkable things. I mean, he was one of the biggest trustbusters and active spokesman for that, and also the national parks. Oddly enough, here's a Republican who essentially picks up the mantle for some of the more important.
Those Republicans are different from these Republicans.
Have you seen that 1898 exhibit they have at the museum in Raleigh now? They've got this exhibit about North Carolina history through pre-Columbian days and so forth. And you meander your way through, and then they've got a real good one on the 1898 with the video and everything about it. So you get a really good overview of it. It's really nice. I think that display is going. I don't think it's going to go continually from now on or not. It's really
Which museum is that in Raleigh?
the history museum in Raleigh. Are you? Yeah, it's a really good overview of the ride and everything.
Well, when you see history,
Good to see you, Tom. All right.
Liz, that was great. Is this posted somewhere?
Give you a copy of it.
I think it's Russell Davis. His picture is